Good morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. And I greet you live from the All-America city of Morrisville in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, the 8th largest state in the United States of America. This will be my final 2 shows of the year, and then we'll be resuming after the holidays in the first week of January, the year 2023. Tomorrow, I'm going to give an attempt to try to go over some of the main events of the year. We're going to spend the show recapping the major events, starting with the war in Ukraine, the economic recession, nationalism occurring around the world, the midterm elections, and all the different things preparing up for 2023 and gearing up for a very interesting year in 2024. Now, I'm going to have a little bit of insight to share with you just based on some monologues I've watched recently on Fareed Zakaria, but I wanted to take a moment to tell you that today, the January 6th hearing, committee will hold its final public hearing, and the House panel is set to vote on referring former President Donald Trump for criminal charges, including its 18-month examination of the 2020 attack on the U.S. Capitol. It's ahead of the expected release of the panel's final report, which is supposed to be the most comprehensive report of the events leading up to the attack. The meeting will be live on television at Eastern Standard Time on major television networks. The nations reached an agreement to slow the loss of nature worldwide. Nearly 200 countries at a UN summit pledged this morning to protect almost a third. Of the planet as a refuge for wild plants and animals by the end of the decade. If the nations follow through, it could help turn the tide in an ongoing extinction cause. And the U.S. border expulsions are on track to end this week. A federal judge rejected a Republican challenge to the Biden administration's attempt to end a controversial Trump-era policy known as Title 42. What does this mean? The policy used by the U.S. border officials since March 2020 to quickly expel asylum seekers could end Wednesday unless the Supreme Court intervenes. Now, my daughter is actually in El Paso, Texas, helping migrants, and it is a terrible situation. People are coming in the droves, and so this crisis continues with just an explosion of migrants coming in, waiting in long lines, living in very, very dire circumstances, even as they get into the border. Apparently, my daughter told me some are jumping off the bridge and breaking their arms and legs just in order to get into the country. And finally, Elon Musk's future at Twitter seems to be uncertain. There's rumors that he's going to be stepped down as CEO and chairman, and the poll has many people on Twitter actually happy that that's going to happen. Before we begin the show, my final analysis as we wind down the year is to analyze, and maybe this is a discussion we'll have in 2023, about the strengths and weaknesses of democracy. While we see democracy crumbling all around us, whether it's in Ukraine because of the war, whether it's in other nations like Italy, Brazil, Venezuela, obviously, Peru, we see that democracies, despite all of the weaknesses, do have strengths. At the end of the day, Fareed Zakaria in a Washington Post article reminded me and others who read his column that, our democratic system was imperfect. The founding fathers were basing a lot of their ideals in America just on writings of Montesquieu and John Locke, and they got it wrong a number of times. But the system of democracy, our form of government, has lasted much longer than other forms of democracy. Now, we say that democracy is under attack, but I think you've got to like democracy's chances of surviving much longer than many of these governments that we see in Iran, Brazil, Peru, Venezuela. How long do you think that kind of authoritarianism can really last? It was Winston Churchill who said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. I think that's a very interesting quote that Fareed shared in his Washington Post article. And tomorrow we're also going to talk a little bit about the populist culture, music, rock and roll, kind of this rebellious streak in America, which in many ways has strengthened our democracy, although we're at a very divided time in our country's history. So there's a book that he recommended. I'm going to try to find the title of that book, but it's about American pop culture and how it's actually enhanced our society in terms of being one that promotes civil rights and freedoms. Yes, oftentimes leading to division and turbulence, but maybe that's a healthy thing for a democracy. Well, let's get started today. I'm going to bring in Lee Newton Rhodes, Mark Lee, and others for my next to last show. I think Mark's going to be joining again. Oh, Mark is here.
Yeah, we're going to play it by ears, and we've also got Dan Worthington and everything. You brought up some interesting points. We don't have Chris Greco here, but he's probably still celebrating because we know that sometimes he is not the biggest fan of France. And there were two sports news items that you did not get to, which was Argentina.
Oh, yeah, finally, I forgot.
France and all in that. So Mr. Messi does get that one trophy that he did not have, which is the World Cup, because he did not have the
I'm
World
so
Cup
sorry,
trophy.
I forgot
And so that definitely happened after a 3-3 tie, and then they won in penalty kicks. So we do know that we sometimes like to tease Chris because he doesn't like anything French. We're not even sure that he likes French fries and all in that space. And then the other news that came out of the world of sports is one that I'm going to take a personal privilege with just for a hot second. But, there's a thing that is in the HBCU community called the Celebration Bowl. And in Deion Sanders' last game at Jackson State, he went down in defeat again, and this time it was to a team from right here in Durham, North Carolina Central University, that was seen as a severe underdog. But I like their attitude, and Lee, you'll love it as well. They went in with the attitude that we're not going to let the underdog stop us, the underdog status stop us from going ahead and taking the victory and all of that. They said that they were going to make him an and one because he was 12-0, so they were determined to be an and one. So he is going to have to take that to Boulder, Colorado when he goes to Boulder, Colorado. That his one defeat was to North Carolina Central University in the Celebration Bowl, which some people consider to be the HBCU championship and all along those lines. So they were glad to do that, and definitely the athletes seemed like they were taking that as a opportunity, and they actually won after a drop pass by their team, because I think that it was a very close game. I think they won in overtime, as I recall, and then they went ahead and scored when they had to score. So, like I said, he'll have to be and one as he goes to his next coaching destination.
Now,
Mark, we're going to go on one more. Can we talk about football?
Yeah,
it was the biggest football upset, or comeback this weekend.
Sure.
What's that, Lee? What was the biggest football?
Minnesota Vikings. They were down 33-0.
Yes.
And they ended up winning the game.
Wow.
Give me a break.
Hey, I'm a diehard Vikings fan, have been since the Fran Tarkenton days. Anybody that knows me and my sports allegiances and knows that and everything is actually sometimes becomes an interesting conversation because my brother is a diehard Bears fan, and I have some other friends that are diehard Packers fans. And even though I am from North Carolina, like I said, ever since the Fran Tarkenton days, I've been through the ups and downs with the Minnesota Vikings, including some Super Bowl losses, including some seasons that were great seasons where they were undefeated and then wound up losing early in the playoffs. I believe that was the team that had Randy Moss, or at least one of them, and everything. So definitely a diehard Minnesota Vikings fan. So glad to see them make that spectacular comeback, but they are a very lethal team when it comes to some of their offensive weapons and all in that space. So, and they look like they could be a strong runner for making a run in the playoffs.
Yeah, I watched SportsCenter, but I didn't get that game, so I'm gonna have to go get the highlights of that. And congratulations to North Carolina Central. And I forgot to talk about the World Cup. My bad. I've just got so much going on before I leave for the holidays.
Yeah, the other thing we forgot to talk about was BYU beat SMU.
Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
With a fourth-string quarterback.
Wow.
Even more impressive.
And SMU has had the 10th most powerful offense in the country, and BYU had 15 of its defensive players not there. And so I don't know how that happened. We call it the Miracle Bowl.
Those Miracle Bowls, what can you say just really quickly? I know we're going to get to some other stories that are out there as well, including some of the news stories. But I did have the pleasure, it is the holiday season, of having some holiday events at the Cultural Arts Center that I work at. So actually the North Carolina Jazz Ensemble performed several Christmas songs, including some that were just good songs that weren't necessarily Christmas songs in that sense, but it was a great concert. I think we had like 220 or so people that were there in attendance, and a lot of folks were enjoying it. So it's good seeing people being out and about and enjoying good music on yesterday afternoon and all in that space. So that was just good seeing folks having that enjoyable moment. And actually something in your lane, there was a group of kids that were learning as part of an art intensive about different things. Last week or 2 weeks ago, they learned about robotics. This week, they actually learned about drones and got to fly a drone as well. So there were some young teenagers and preteens that were there that got the opportunity to fly a drone as part of that art intensive that will be taking place again in January. This is their last one for this year, but those are some of the things that are out happening in the community of Durham. But it's just good seeing that folks are getting out and about. As a matter of fact, Durham also had its holiday parade on this past weekend as well, and apparently it was one of the largest crowds of folks out there cheering for that particular event. And there was everything from floats to bands to my brother's slingshot group was out there, and a number of other groups that were out there as well. So it's just, and of course the political officials were there in the police department and the fire department and a number of others. So it was just good seeing, even though I was watching online because of working at the Hayti Center, that the crowd was there. And I've heard reports that it was one of the biggest crowds in several years because folks are ready to get out and get back out into the public.
Yeah, that's good news. And turning the tides now to, we're going to talk about this notion of democracy, and I sort of paraphrase Fareed's post, but I found it to be interesting that we're seeing of this disruption of democracy around the world. But at the end of the day, yesterday, what he spoke about, which I found interesting, is that the United States, despite all of the crisis we're facing internally, somehow we managed to do okay. We can have more debt than most countries because of the value of the dollar. Unemployment is relatively low. Companies are growing and hiring. The stock market's not that bad. Now, yeah, we're in the middle of inflation. Gas prices have been rising. Not too bad now. But the United States, long term, we just are a lot more resilient than other countries, which I think we should all be grateful for, right?
I just want to point out that the United States is not a democracy. And as far as I know, the word democracy is not mentioned in the Constitution.
It's a republic.
Constitutional republic.
It's a republic, and that's the unique form of government that we have, right? I mean, the fact that we've endured for so long, you have a government that can respect civil rights, but also one that can prevent chaos. And despite all of the division that we have, I actually disagree with many of these liberals and progressives that democracy's finished, democracy's over. No, America will continue. This is just a phase that we're going through. We had some patches like this in history. The 70s, the late 60s and 70s.
Oh, Lord.
Was an era of rebellion and division, right? And we made it through to a new normal at that time. And I think it's going to happen. I think you will eventually see a return to candidates moving more to the center, both on the Democrat and Republican side. I think that's what people want, and give people a better choice rather than the extremes of each party. And so that's my polar bear on American democracy.
Hey, Steve, speaking of American democracy, but I do want to get, since it is the world edition, to another part of the world that had a issue, and that's actually not a democracy. I believe that they still are under a very interesting rule because they still technically are under the monarchy, even though they do have a prime minister and all of that. But the High Court in London, we talk about immigration and all here in the United States. But how about earlier today, they issued a long-awaited ruling that found that a controversial British immigration policy was lawful months after the UK government first introduced the plan to deport hundreds of potential asylum seekers to Rwanda. That's right, they're going to send them to Rwanda, where their claims would be heard and decided by Rwandan authorities. The court found that the plan did not breach Britain's legal obligations under domestic legislation and the United Nations Refugee Convention, but that the country's interior minister must in the future consider carefully the circumstances of individual asylum claimants if their cases are to be heard in Rwanda rather than the UK. And apparently the justices wrote it in their decision that Priti Patel, a previous interior minister who served under Boris Johnson's premiership, had implemented the policy in a flawed manner in several of the cases the court considered. But it looks like there had been a whole lot of human rights groups and others that were up in arm and all in this space. But that is what's happening. It looks like they're saying, hey, we can ship
Can we
them
do the same thing, I wonder? Can we do the same thing? I guess what we were doing in Mexico to have their cases heard, right? That's what we were doing before Biden decided he wanted to fight that and flood our border once again, because there is no border security in the United States, right? I might point that out. There is no border.
That's what I'm saying, Dan. But are we the only one? Because in the year to June 2022, the UK's National Statistics Office recorded more than 500,000 net immigrant arrivals through government-approved routes, up from 173,000 in the year before. Meanwhile, more than 45,000 migrants have arrived in small boats across the English Channel from Chris Greco's favorite place, France, so far this year, compared with fewer than 30,000
that doesn't compare to the United
2021.
States. They don't even know the number that's crossing the border in the United States, but it's millions and millions. It's ridiculous, right? I know you're a pro-immigration and illegal immigration advocate. You shouldn't be promoting illegal immigration because that's unlawful, right? But you do. You advocate it. That's a
Is that true, Mark?
No,
Are you guys in favor?
I would say that.
No.
Let's ask you now. Take 1 second. Mark, we're asking you now. Are you in favor of illegal immigration on the southern border?
No, illegal immigration has got a major issue, but I am in favor of making sure that, well, a couple of things. One, I'm in favor of those that have got the dreamer status, that they have been here for a number of years. And
that's got nothing to do. I hear that. That's got nothing to do with the southern border.
That's different.
Southern border should be secure, should it not?
No, the borders, any border should be secured. Even the northern border should be secured. My one time of dealing with immigration and everything, and this was years ago, was actually involving some friends of mine that went back to, I believe they were either in Oregon or Washington, and they went across the border to Canada, and then I had to actually get their immigration papers or their passports for them to get back.
This is the problem with our system. So Dan Worthington, I am a moderate Democrat. I have been the #1 vote getter in 4 elections in a town that is 1/3 Democrat, 1/3 Republican, and 1/3 independent. There's no one in the history of our town that's won that many votes across all spectrums. Here's the problem. If I want to run for a higher office, I have to make it through a Democratic primary. And if I'm going to get it through a Democratic primary, I have to actually say what I don't believe and say, yeah, we don't have an illegal immigration problem.
You have to be a whore if you want to run for higher office.
No, but you have to sell out to the extremes on either side. And so the progressive Democrats would answer your question, no, let's let them all in. I agree with you, a Republican,
Steve,
that we can't do it.
I'm sorry. Steve, you said you have to sell to the extremes on both sides. What's the extreme position on the right?
I guess the extreme position on I guess
your borders.
Yeah, I don't think the position on the right is actually as extreme as the position on the far left.
Yeah,
I think even senators like Senator Tillis, for example, who has actually been advocating, and I want to go on the record and give him credit and thank him. He's been working with me and others here to make sure that he's advancing skill-based immigration. And Tillis is calling for some common sense reforms that would make it, through border and security, that people just couldn't come in here and, without going through the immigration laws of the land. Now, with that being said, the United States foreign policy, and I've said this time and time again, we're not doing anything to strengthen the Southern Hemisphere. And so these situations are so bad. Dan and Lee,
couple of questions I got to ask you and everything. And since you went there and all in that space, there are a couple of things that are coming through the country on a regular basis, drugs being one of them, and everything that are coming from some of those Latin American countries and some of the other countries. I have not seen some of the states that are strongly Republican doing that great of a job in terms of actually dealing with those traffics. And in some places, they are actually allowing them to go into areas that they know are inner cities and poor areas, and all in that sense. That is one problem that I have with some of the Republican immigrations. There are some other things that are going on Hold on a second. There are also in farm countries or farm spaces and everything that have we're talking about illegal immigrants. There are a whole lot of illegal immigrants in my mind that are working in these big farms and all of that in places like Texas, in places like Florida, and in places that are definitely governed by Republican governors. Have you seen them do anything to stop that and everything? So that would be an issue that they need to address, because that is actually in their state.
Hey, Mark, it's not a couple of them. It's like 11 million illegal immigrants are currently in the United States.
I have no idea.
There's 11 million. They've actually counted 11 million illegal immigrants in the United States.
Probably more.
I was like, Nick, are the states that are on the southern border allowed to shut down their border, or is that a federal issue that the states are not allowed to touch?
Well, immigration is a federal issue. I mean, the thing is, overall, it's a federal issue in terms of bringing people in and out. The immigration laws.
So then it's unfair to blame the governors, Democrat or Republican, on what's coming in their states on the southern border. Is that correct?
No. Life is unfair. So you can jump up and say unfair. So what? It doesn't matter.
So what are they supposed to do?
Okay, let's put it this way: might makes right. The federal government controls the immigration laws of the United States of America. Federal government is run by our inept Congress and our inept president.
I'm sorry, Governor Nick, what would you do on the border?
Pardon?
Governor Nick, what would you do?
Okay, I would process them in, Lee. Okay, because our nation was founded on immigrant status. So unless you can find documentation,
Nick,
process them in.
What? Process them in? Yeah, because we have another problem here in the United States. It's called we don't have people that are taking these service jobs right now. Because
what do you think would happen then if we didn't process them in?
Pardon?
Eventually, the wages would go down. Supply and demand. Am I wrong?
Sure.
I think the other thing that I would do if I was governor, or
your point is, counselor. Okay, I mean the thing is, wages would go down across the board because you would have a lot of low-end service workers. But I'm telling you right now, I was down in Fayetteville, North Carolina, of all places, trying to go to Cracker Barrel. There's no waiters and waitresses. There are plenty of empty tables because they can't hire people at the federal minimum wage, which is an atrocity. But to begin with, it's $7.25, never indexed for inflation. Now, if you think about it, and Dan Worthington's an estate planning attorney, they index the unified credit for rich people every year. So every year they can exclude more and more millions from the federal
estate actually tax. For all Americans.
Nick, I think you're missing something.
They never index the minimum wage. However,
Nick, I think you're missing something.
What am I missing? Are we a nation of immigrants, or are we a nation of non-immigrants?
There are a lot of people who choose not to work because they get paid more not to work than to work.
I don't believe in those programs, Lee. Okay,
I agree with you. Okay, fine, we're on board with
that. I'm not a right-wing left crony. I would eliminate those programs. I've seen,
but that's why a lot of people aren't working at Cracker Barrel.
Yeah,
the thing is, not to work.
Listen, those programs need to be eliminated. I mean, and I've seen those programs. They don't work, Lee, and you need to eliminate those programs. But at the same time, if we remember, we have the Statute of Liberties sitting up there saying, "Bring me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses," and then they don't bring them. They go, "No, you're not allowed here because you're."
Yeah, but we have a limit on the amount of immigrants we take in the country every year, Nick, by statute. And so, but
it's also by country.
That's why we have that limit, Nick.
It's by country, okay. Right. And so the thing is, here's what we're looking at right now. Most of the people are coming in from Venezuela, Nicaragua, and the failed state of, obviously, El Salvador. Not doing like what Donald Trump, who lied to the American public, saying they bring crime and all this stuff.
Well,
no,
actually
escaping crime and drugs.
Nick,
that's the problem.
Nick.
Yeah. So Donald Trump is the guy who did a disservice.
No, you're a liar about that concept. Listen. So there is a big problem at the border with drug trafficking, sex trafficking, human slavery. And that is all part and parcel of the lack of border controls. Now, who's making the money on the drug trafficking and sex slavery? Well, it's the people who are purveyors of it. Who's making the money on the side? It's the politicians.
But
they're getting the big. They're getting the big money. It's the dark money.
Separate issue.
No, it's not.
The drug cartels are
not.
an entirely separate issue from
No,
a
they're
person
not.
who's escaping Venezuela because it's a failed communist state.
Yeah, but how can
and the thing is, they're
difference
looking
in
to
telling
create a
the
better
truth?
life.
What's the difference between a trained Venezuelan radical soldier coming across pretending to be someone that's just poor and disheveled and persecuted by my country? Oh my God, they're going to kill me if I stay there. And somebody that's just coming in to create havoc and terror. We don't know. We have no way of knowing the people's backgrounds. We have no way of knowing. Now, if farmers want to sponsor alien workers on temporary basis to come and work for them,
Yeah.
well, super. If we want to do that in our restaurants, well, super. Let's put a program in place to do that. But it's called sponsorship.
But
People
Dan,
come in, they have
It's
jobs.
a good idea, though. I
but
think.
Dan,
They actually do have
create
that
a
program.
connection. Create a connection between the immigrant and someone in the country that's willing to sponsor them for a job. Then you're creating a support network for that individual, and you're filling a employment need in the United States. At the same time, you're not making them a liability on our system. So,
But Dan, hold on a second.
Was
Both
it
of
Mark?
you-
Actually, they do
hold on a
have
second,
that
Dan. Both of you and Nick are
I've brought
lawyers.
people
Hold
in
on a second.
that.
Nick and Dan, both of you are lawyers and everything. And the question I've got is what I brought up earlier. There are a lot of these corporations that are giant corporations. There are giant farming corporations that own a lot of this farmland and everything. Do we actually honestly believe that they will sponsor these immigrants when they've already been having these immigrants that are paying and that are illegal? They know they're illegal. They have no.
They've got to sponsor them and make them.
Once you sponsor them, Mark, I've actually done this. I brought people in under what they call the HB1 visa, and I can tell you what the problem is. I've had several people work for my company that came from other countries, from South Africa to Canada and other places. Okay, here's the problem. First of all, it costs the business owner like $1,500 in legal fees to get the person in.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a problem, because when you start bringing
make it up on the wage.
What?
You make it up on paying them less.
Yeah, you're gonna have to pay them less because you got to count in the legal fees to get them in HB1 visa. The other thing is it's a laborious process to the point where it also says, well, this is a type of job that no other American can fill. Well, you got a problem in the restaurant industry where the farming
they're basically making minimum wage. In some cases, less than minimum wage.
Hey, Nick, but that's an LAA visa. The LAA visa is a lazy ass America visa.
Yeah, right.
They're not willing to take those jobs.
I'm just telling you, these are the practical problems, Dan.
No, but then you create an LLA visa, lazy ass America visa.
Yeah,
but
where you create a visa for people to come and work.
But this is why we need. Senator Tillis has offered.
We need a national discussion on it with business owners that have actually had to go through that.
Tom Tillis and Kristen Sinema. I'm just writing a blog this week for the newspaper about it, but the Sinema Tillis bill actually advocated providing access for the Dreamers to advanced citizenship, and then also at the same time had provisions there addressing border security. The problem is that this Congress and Senate cannot come together to fix the problem. We obviously have an immigration system that is not streamlined, that's not efficient, and what it's doing is it allowing immigrants to come in here illegally. And then those who are coming here through the system correctly are actually having to wait 10 to 12 years, sometimes even longer, to become citizens. And now they're moving to Canada and other countries. And so when we need skilled labor, particularly during a labor shortage, we're actually sending them away. So the system is broken.
The system is broken in Washington, D.C., Steve, because they spend all this time on the January 6th hearings, when they should have been spent time on the immigration issues. If you had congressional hearings on immigration that were open to the general public and look for the problems and solutions, you'd find them. But they want to spend time on
But Nick, hold on a second. But we say that, and then
they want to spend time with Hunter Biden.
We say that, but like I said, it's the World Edition, and we say that, and there is actually an event going on in Sasha's area, but it's actually in Montreal, where apparently one of the other issues that we talked about several times during this course of this year, and everything has been around the environment. And apparently more than 190 countries earlier this week, actually I think earlier today, adopted a sweeping agreement to protect nature. I mean, that seems like that should be something very basic that we all want to do and everything. At the United Nations Biodiversity Conference there in Montreal, the gavel went down in the early hours of Monday, that would be today, on an agreement which includes 23 targets aimed at halting the biodiversity crisis, including a pledge to protect 30% of the lands and ocean by 2030. Only 17% of the land and 10% of the oceans are currently considered protected, and campaigners have hailed it as a major milestone for conserving complex, fragile ecosystems on which everyone depends. But guess what? Just like we were talking about with the U.S., some countries are unhappy, criticizing the agreement for not going far enough. Why the heck the Democratic Republic of Congo cares? But the Democratic Republic of Congo has said it cannot support the agreement and has complained that it was rushed through without following proper processes.
You know, Steve, when you get to Congress, you have them prioritize their time. I mean, you only have so much time in a day, and they waste time on all sorts of things. Climate change is important, but not as important as things like immigration and the national debt. I mean, you have some really
I'm sorry, Nick.
What?
Why do you think parties, when they have the control of all three branches of the government, do not pass immigration reform?
Because they don't even discuss it. Do you see anything?
But yeah, I understand that. But why do you think they don't discuss it? Because they don't give a damn.
You know, it boggles my mind how they operate up there in the except.
Well, I think part of the problem is
when I was in Washington D.C.
Before we bring in Sasha, and we want to get an update on Ukraine, there was a wonderful special on 60 Minutes yesterday about the Ukrainian children that have cancer and how the First Lady of Ukraine is working with other First Ladies and to bring them into other countries so they can be treated. It was a very emotional show. But I'll just end with one comment, then I want to get an update from Sasha on Ukraine. But the bottom line is that, the reason, Lee, is that politicians, particularly when you're in a 2-year term, are worried about one thing: re-election. Okay, yeah. And so, as I said, how do you get re-elected in the American system? Well, if you're going to be primaried, you're going to go and you're going to say what the left extreme wings of your party want you to say.
Steve, and so what you're saying is valid. Okay, I agree with you. But the 2 years congressmen don't run the party, don't run what bills get passed through. It's the people at top who've been there for 50 years. Nancy Pelosi, Charles Schumer, they're the ones who run the show.
They're worried about being primary too.
They're about to retire. We're about to have a younger voice.
That's why my prediction, and we're going to let Sasha Starr come in here, but that's why I believe Senator Tillis, in my opinion, won't be seeking re-election, because he's doing so many things on the middle now that, my God, if he ran in a primary, he's going to just be primaried. I mean, someone's going to come in and run against him. So.
Hey, that's a unique new word called primaried.
Yeah, that primary thing. But Steve, hold on a second. I had a quick question for Sasha as well. That's not totally related to the Ukraine, but it is related to another topic that we talked about. And I definitely want to hear from him on the Ukraine. But, several times in our stories, we've talked about mass shootings and the impact of mass shootings in the United States. Apparently, there's one in Canada as well, because that's one of the news stories that I heard about recently that I guess over this past yesterday evening and Sunday evening, there was a mass shooting there in Canada, in Toronto. And I'm wondering, are we going to hear the same kind of gun conversations that we've heard in the United States there in Canada, or is this like a one-time event and it won't be the same kind of conversations that we have here? Because I did see that it was at a condo shooting there in Canada and it's all over the news. But I'm just wondering your take as to whether it's going to be an issue that kind of like plays into the conversations we've seen in other parts of the world, particularly the United States, but also Australia, or is it not something that Canadians are going to jump up in arms the way that we in the U.S.
No pun intended.
If you were waiting for my comments, I don't have any comments about what's happened with this mass shooting recently in Toronto, because it just happened and it will happen again. Maybe in 3 days, in 3 months, or in 3 years. It's happening all over the world, and there is nothing can be done about it. In Canada, there is a fairly good control over the arms, but it's not helping. It's just gonna happen. It's one of those things. Now,
Crazy.
with Ukraine situation is very, very, very different because it's inflicted all this present situation where Russia is without any consequences, just destroying Ukrainian cities, infrastructure, killing innocent civilians, with with the fact that Lend-Lease was approved several months ago by American people, because 100% of Senate and majority, huge majority of the House approved Lend-Lease, which gives ultimate authority to administration to bring any amount of arms, regardless of cost, regardless of times, or whatever. It's just up to the administration. So administration doesn't have any excuses that, oh, we wanted to deliver, for example, 200 tanks, but we have money only for 50 tanks. So we can deliver 50, but we cannot deliver 200. That's not true. The Lend-Lease actually offers a possibility to deliver basically any amount, whatever the administration would decide to do. And now, when the Ukrainian city are indiscriminately uh, being destroyed, now it's a time, if not earlier, to bring at least some of this arsenal available to change situation in the Ukrainian front. But seems to me the administration has its own um, drummer to follow, and I don't understand the goals of administration. They're not being articulated. It's something that not to allow Russia to win, but at the same time not allow Ukraine to be victorious and get Russia out of its territory. It's not being articulated. We don't understand the administration's goals in this affair, what American people want, what administration want, how can they get
They don't
there?
either.
No,
But,
nobody knows.
But Sasha and Dan, can't we say the same thing that we just said, or that you just said about gun violence, about the war in the Ukraine, in the sense of it's going to happen. Countries are going to invade each other, and all in that space, and we can do what we want to support them.
No,
And,
Mark,
do a certain
I'm
amount of
sorry,
things and
Mark.
everything. But it's
Mark,
the
I'm
whole
so
nature.
sorry. You have to understand the difference between the action of some individuals, perhaps not even healthy, at least emotionally and psychologically and so on, and actions
Probably not.
of the countries. Nobody can police 7 billion people what they do every day, which is impossible, and nobody ever even tried that. But there are about, let's see, 200 countries in the world. It's not billions, it's 200. And you can basically, through a mechanism, unfortunately, which are not working, like United Nations and others, but at least these 200 actors, you can monitor and you can make sure that atrocities such as what's happening in Ukraine don't happen. But you have to have a will, you have to have the mental capacity to understand that and do something about it. That's a different story.
Sasha, what you're saying is actually very
it's like
important.
Sasha and
And
Nick, it's
see,
like a
here's the
two-pronged.
problem again with Congress. Okay, they don't prioritize their time. They should be spending time hearings on the Ukraine-Russian war.
Nick, I'm sorry, Nick, they do prioritize their time.
January 6th.
Nick,
Nick,
I don't
Nick
think
and Lee,
the
hold on a second.
Congress
Congress
Nick
does
and Lee,
prioritize their time.
Congress
It's just
had
we're
done
When?
everything what it
Nick
has
and
to
Lee,
do.
hold on a
priority.
second.
Come on.
Nick and Lee, hold on a
January
second.
6th
Congress cannot go
is not as
beyond that
important.
act. Congress
January 6th is not as important as a
allocates
bloody
money.
nuclear war.
The money were
To you, but the
allocated
Congress
through
it
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
Lend-Lease.
We're not
to me,
the
the
Now
priority.
nuclear
it's all
war
in the
is
hands
important.
of administration.
The war in Ukraine is important, more important than the January 6th hearings.
Nick,
okay?
I agree with you,
They're
but Congress
wasting their
doesn't.
time.
But Congress, Nick, Congress has nothing to do with Ukrainian war except that they approved the budget. They approved Lend-Lease. That's how far they can go. The
Yeah,
Senate
no,
and
they
the
can go
House.
further.
That's full
But,
stop period.
hey,
They've done it
Congress can
6
go
months
further.
ago.
We
Hey,
can
Nick
have
and
hearings
Sasha,
on.
hold on a second.
We
Nick
can
and
have hearings
Sasha.
on current war crimes. committed by Russia. We can have hearings on current espionage by Russians. We can have hearings on the Indians and the Chinese that are indirectly supporting Russia in the war in Ukraine. Yes, we can have hearings on this. It is a priority. But no, we want to talk about something that took place 2 years ago.
Nick, hold on a second. The question I've got for y'all is, because this conversation has been going on for decades, if not centuries, is yes, the war in Ukraine is definitely going on. Ukraine is doing a fantastic job of defending their country and all in that space. But we have this whole argument around whether we want to be interventionists or isolationists, and that's the other conversation.
I think that ship already sailed, Mark. We are interventionists. We are not isolationists. The only times we tried that, what pulled us into World War I and World War II. So come on, we are a world superpower. You're on the United States. If you want to be a superpower, you got to act like a superpower. And yes,
Nick, don't you have to do that across the board? You can't just be You can't be just an interventionist in, say, Ukraine and not be an interventionist in Eritrea.
Mark.
So that's my problem. If you're going to be an interventionist, you have to be.
I'm sorry, Somalia fighting Sudan is not as important as Russia's fighting Ukraine. I'm sorry, because one can create a nuclear holocaust, the other one will not. So you got.
No, but you say that. But how do we communicate around the world and everything? We communicate through computers. We communicate around phones. We communicate around a number of things that are lithium based, and a lot of those things are in those African countries. So you can't say that in some degrees it is not as important in everything, because if we lose access to that, we pretty much are going to be crippled by our technology.
The priorities, it is not as important as a nuclear war from Russia. I'm sorry.
Mexico.
The thing is, whether or not you get lithium for your stupid cars is not as important, because you can still run cars on gas. So what is more important? Hydrogen. Yeah. So what is more important is actually the war in Ukraine. So the problem with the United States of America is we don't prioritize our priorities. And we don't have a plan for anything. And David Walker points that out. We don't have a plan for the national debt. We don't have a plan for Social Security going broke. By the time we're done with the show, we're going to be more in debt and Social Security going broke. We have no plan at all.
I'm sorry, Nick, you keep saying we don't have a plan.
The country is going broke, and we're spending how much money to the Ukraine?
Yeah, we're spending a lot, because, again, it goes back to priorities, okay? How much money do you spend on Ukraine versus how much money do you spend getting blown up? I mean, there's a whole different set of priorities. And then, Mark, we gave $59 billion to the African countries. Wait a minute. Couldn't that $59 billion be better used in the United States of America in cities like Durham or Detroit? And why did we just hand it out? Okay, and was it a handout? There was no hearings on that at all. Instead we're doing hearings on Donald Trump. Who cares about him?
No, I agree that the hearing on Donald Trump is a total waste of money. But speaking of that, and I did have one other news story that I was geared to get to that came from Reuters, and I'd love to hear Sasha's thoughts as well as everybody else's thoughts. But there's another issue that's been going around the country for a number of years, and we just had a recent decision about it, that being the Dobbs case. And apparently the Catholic Church has gotten involved as well, because Father Frank Pavone, a leader of the U.S. anti-abortion movement and a strong supporter of, guess who, former President Donald Trump, has been dismissed from the Catholic priesthood for blasphemous social media posts and disobedience to the bishop. So the Vatican defrocked Pavone in November, according to a letter sent to U.S. bishops from its ambassador in Washington. The letter, seen by Reuters, says Pavone will not be allowed to appeal, and he was defrocked for blasphemous communications on social media and a persistent disobedience of the lawful instructions of his diocesan bishop.
Just change his faith.
Mark, for my benefit and maybe others, can you be more specific when they say he was posting stuff that wasn't appropriate? Can you put some context to that?
What did he do?
He doesn't know.
No, it says in 1 hour, 40-minute video on Sunday, Pavone, still wearing a priest collar, said he had been persecuted in the church for decades and derided his critics as the dumbest in the world. In a Twitter post in 2020, he spoke of supporters of his goddamn loser Biden and his morally corrupt, American-hating, God-hating Democrat Party.
So Mark, but that doesn't start nuclear war. Well, everything what you just said.
All that's true.
What does he expect? He criticizes the group he's with. What does he expect?
He wasn't lying. I mean, he was telling the truth.
and by the way, he released a video of an aborted fetus on an altar in the 2016 presidential campaign and urged Catholics not to vote for Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton, who later lost to Trump. So yeah, he definitely had some things
that
in
was
there
a good move too.
Very much controversial. Like I said,
what's wrong with that? It's true. I mean, Mark. I mean, if it's hard for people to face the truth, then
I mean, I remember that there were advertisements, and I think they were still there. Nick, you can correct me if I'm wrong and everything, but I think they were allowed to stay up, but they did get a lot of flack because there were pictures of what happened to a fetus on billboards here in North Carolina. I remember that being like a major story, I want to say about 2 or 3 years ago, and all in that space. And as far as I know, Nick, they stayed up there for a while, even though there were a lot of people that were up in arms because of the imagery that was there, no matter what side of the abortion issue you stand on, and all in that space. So I'm wondering,
Mark, why would those on the left
how much of public space are we allowing is the question I'm asking, because like I said,
why would those on the left
that on the back of a bus? But
why would those on the left be opposed to just showing a clump of cells on a poster?
Say what?
Why would those on the left be opposed to just showing a clump of cells on a poster?
I'm not talking about a clump of cells. I'm talking about broken up.
No. Those on the left feel an unborn fetus, a baby before its birth, is just a clump of cells. It's not a person. So why would they be opposed to showing a clump of cells? That's my question.
Because it shows it's a person.
That's exactly right, Dan.
If you get enough cells, it becomes a person.
But Nick, I'm asking from a legal standpoint, because you're the lawyer, as is Dan. Is that crossing the line of not just good taste, but also the lines of what is allowed in the media? Because as I recall, there was a lot of
Mark, that doesn't start nuclear war.
Provocative, for lack of
Mark, you're talking about free speech.
And 75 cents will buy you a cup of coffee. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
It's international edition. Let's talk about what's happened yesterday, which was witnessed by 3.5 billion people around the world. The great World Soccer Final.
I
knew you were going there
to anything. And now, by the way, a couple of interesting facts. The two main heroes of this absolutely beautiful final game, of course, Lionel Messi and Kylian Mbappe. Now, what's the common thing between these two great players?
Neither one are Argentinian.
Neither one are United
They
States.
are both playing in the French club PSG. And that club PSG is owned by Qatar. So they are both property of Qatar, number one.
And it was a great
Number two. So the great team from Morocco, it's the first African country which has ever made to semi-final of the World Cup. So the Africa has to sing and dance and praise Morocco. Do they do that? Absolutely not, because they are viewing Morocco as colonial power, because Morocco holds on to Western Sahara territory, and Africa wants Morocco to get out of there. Morocco, of course, resists. So therefore, Morocco is colonial power. You got it?
Well, and once again, a great win. I mean, it was one of the best World Cups I've ever seen. And that's a good segue into Africa before Dan Worthington. One thing I want to talk about before we end today, and maybe we'll begin the new year talking about, is Africa. Last week, they had the Africa Summit at the White House. And what was amazing is that Rwanda and Nigeria signed the Artemis Accords, which is basically space exploration. And this is really exciting. And I think Africa is a huge market. Billions of people there. We've had Nigerian leaders on this show and other shows on Roku TV network. I think that it's a tremendous opportunity for us to collaborate with Africa. And we don't hear anything about U.S. policy towards Africa either, right? Which is, interesting. But Dan, go ahead.
Well, you don't hear a lot about U.S. policy anywhere, really. I mean, does U.S. have a policy? No, I think it's more or less knee-jerking around. Well, no, I think going into the Biden presidency, the policy was anything that Trump did was bad, so we have to undo that, which meant destroying energy independence and a lot of other things, right? undoing everything he did, some of which was very, very good. And not that Trump is particularly virtuous. We all know that. Sasha knows that. I know that. It's just that you don't undo good policies just because you don't like the guy, and the left, the new Green Deal idiots, are pushing you to do it.
Dan, the biggest example of the hypocrisy is when Trump was president. A lot of people came out, I'm not taking Trump vaccine. I'm not touching that. And as soon as Biden was elected, you have to take it. They mandated it.
The mandates were, I'm trying to remember. They might have even been parts of the Trump era and everything as well. But a lot of it was also the nature.
He also
of what
said bleach and hydrochloric and
everything. It was also what he was saying. But I do have a question for everybody, just really quickly, because one of the things that we talk about all the time on the show, and Nick may have some thoughts, and I know Steve is the global nature of the world and everything.
That's
and
we
are in the middle of a pandemic, and as part of this pandemic, there is a major ally of ours that a lot of their people are saying that they're not going to travel anymore. And is that going to be a problem? Because I was reading an article recently, I think it was NBC and everything, but they surveyed 16,000 adults in 15 countries, and they found that a large percentage of people in Asia, and particularly Japan, said, skip this traveling thing. I'm not traveling anymore, and all in that space. So as that being one of our major allies in terms of business, is that going to be an issue? Because when I'm seeing these countries, a lot of them are allies. It's like 35% of the Japanese said, I'm not traveling again. Y'all can forget it. That I've had enough of the travel, and who knows what's going to happen if I travel. 15% of the South Koreans said that. 14% of the Chinese said that, and even 11% of the Mexicans said that they're not going to travel anymore as well. So that could solve your problem, man, and all in that space. But is this going to be a problem if our major allies are saying, look, we don't want to travel anywhere. We're going to stay right here where we are. We're not going anywhere. We don't care what the business deal is. So my question is this going to become...
That's why you have Zoom, and that's why you had Discovery Channel, right? And that's why you have TV. Those three things are the things that make it so you don't really have to travel much anymore.
Right.
Well, I think the important thing to understand is that the best and the most safe way of traveling these days is traveling by car, because you're skipping all the lines at the airport and flying in private airplanes.
Or train, that's good, but only local.
Very comfortably.
You can have your gun.
Inexpensively, by the way, travel by car.
But that's only local. From an economic standpoint, I want y'all to hear these numbers. Some 386,000 Japanese travelers went overseas in August. That was a far cry from the 2.1 million that came overseas before the pandemic in August of 2019. So that's a big drop from the Japanese standpoint and everything. So I'm wondering, is this not going to hurt our economy? Y'all are the economic experts and everything. And they did say 10% of India is also not trying to travel either, Steve. But I was wondering, that's a sizable amount of people.
Well, now they have a Disneyland over there, so they don't really have to worry about coming here for that, right? And Euro Disney, I mean, you got that there, so they don't have to come over here for that. That was the major attraction. So they'll miss out on the Grand Canyon and a few other things. They won't come skiing as much in the U.S., but they got the Alps. I mean, seriously.
They got skiing there.
Oh, yeah, they got skiing. So, I mean, what's a big deal?
I think the statistics are relevant. He said like 14 to 16%. Well, they may not even be able to afford to travel, and it's a hard issue for them. So they're not traveling. So what? When you have a global economy, I don't think they're going to have any impact at all on that 14 to 16% who are, quote, scared to travel.
It was 35%, which is 1 in 3 in Japan.
Yeah, but it's statistically really insignificant. I don't think they're going to have any effect at all.
Also, airlines can raise price for their tickets so they can withstand this drop in travel.
Also, Sasha, what they do is they pull planes out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tracked as needed. So I think if they travel, fine. If they don't, that's okay too. I don't see that being a real relevant issue when we have a lot of problems in the world, like Ukraine getting bombed. That's a real issue. Japanese travel.
Chris would like to say we don't pay attention to that. We pay attention
Japanese
to
travel,
the Avatar movie that just came
South
out. By the way, I
Korean
did go
travel,
watch it. It
not
was
an
a
issue.
good movie and everything, so I did go watch it. It was a very good movie. You've not seen Avatar, which deals with the waterways and all of that, go check it out because I did watch it. But then we're also paying attention to that. And we're paying attention to Amber Heard, who has finally settled her defamation case against her ex-husband, Johnny Depp. And she announced that in an Instagram post earlier today. So she said that the decision to settle with Depp, and there's a 24-year difference between them, was very difficult, adding that it followed a great deal of deliberation. So she had to deliberate before she did that and everything. But she said,
I think your lawyers.
I think Amber Heard is also a waste of time too. I mean, Amber Heard and these celebrities are a complete waste of time. We have international issues to discuss. Amber Heard is not one of them.
What she said is, y'all love this. It's important for me to say that I never chose this. I defended my truth, and in doing so, my life, as I know it, was destroyed. The vilification I have faced on social media is an amplified version of which the way in which women are re-victimized when they come forward. So now she's trying to become the poster child for women in general. So I don't know
all that, okay, but Kardashian will beat the hell out of her anyway.
Yeah,
Kardashian. Guys, I gotta run. I just wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and close out early, if that's okay. Maybe another minute or so, and I'm going to go to close out.
Go for it.
Well, anyway, we got another minute or two. So, I guess anyway, any final thoughts before we begin?
Just a quick question, Steve. There's Elon Musk put a poll out on Twitter whether he should step down or not. He said it would abide by any decision, and millions of people are voting.
Yeah, I mentioned that in my commentary. So we'll see what happens. Interesting times.
He says he will step down. He said that when he came on board. Remember, he runs 3 companies: SpaceX, Tesla, and Twitter. And that's really difficult things to do.
What I find interesting, I've been binge watching House of Cards, and I find it interesting that when Frank Underwood was president, the person that he had a relationship was Raymond Tusk. I found that interesting to see that it rhymed with Elon Musk. So did they create that character? Now, he wasn't a technology guy, but he was a guy that was really strong with China and had a relationship with the former president. So,
by the way, Twitter's reach is only 280 million people, or 230. They're not as big as people think they are. The biggest reach is Google and YouTube. Google has a reach of close to 3. Google, Facebook, and YouTube have huge billion-plus reaches. Twitter's only 280 million. We hear a lot about it because we're here in the United States, and Elon Musk jumps up and down a lot, but they really do not have a big reach. They're not even close to YouTube.
Musk has already exposed the corruption on the part of the government with respect to social media. That was his major objective in buying Twitter anyway, right? Yeah. And so he don't want to run it anymore.
I mean, they're all interconnected.
Hold on a second. We got to let Steve close out. The other thing I was going to say, and this is just really quickly, and I'm tossing it to you, is apparently there was a big up in the arms news all over Twitter, speaking of Twitter, about Roger Goodell, because apparently he showed up at the HBCU championship, because guess what? Roger Goodell has a black nephew, and apparently he plays for Jackson State University. So now everybody's like, wait a minute, we didn't even know Roger Goodell had that particular nephew, and all in that space. So that's now been revealed on Twitter because he showed up, and everybody's like,
small world.
Hey, well, anyway, it's time for closeout. It's been a wonderful show. Tomorrow, we're going to wrap up the year talking about some of the major events of 2022. It's been quite a year, a lot of news, a lot of headlines, a lot of change in the United States and around the world. The first year as we went in our post-COVID world where many restrictions were lifted, and we're going to talk about that and what does it mean in terms of the elections in 2024, but 2023 will be the beginning of what is expected to be a very long cycle to the presidential election of 2024. I want to thank each of you for being with us. Wishing all of you a happy holidays, Christmas, and also I would be remiss if I did not end this monologue ending with wishing everyone a happy Hanukkah. All of the Jewish faith, they're every day lighting the menorah with a candle, and this is celebrating the rise of the Second Temple in Jerusalem after the Jewish people were able to succeed against oppressors from Syria. And it's a very special time for the Jewish community. Want to wish all of them a happy Hanukkah, and like the light on the candle of a menorah, let the light of love burn brightly as we respect and honor all the different faiths. So from our family to yours, happy Hanukkah to anybody on the staff, anyone around the world that is watching this show. We'll be back tomorrow for my final show of the year. Thank you all so much, and we'll talk to you soon.